happy St. Patrick's Day. I mean, it's St. Patrick's Day for me because I'm recording this on Thursday, but I guess you'll be watching it after that. So, I guess make sure you were wearing green yesterday or something like that. Insert logo and dramatic opening music here. Look at that, even California is wearing green. That is really rare. So apparently not everyone knows about this tradition, which I find a bit odd because I've grown up with it and the people around me all seem to know about it, but the way we do it in our family is that on St. Patrick's Day, you wear green. And you have to wear green because if you are not wearing green on St. Patrick's Day, you are giving everyone around you permission to pinch you. So you must be wearing something green, and depending on where you are, it may range from depending on what's acceptable. So, for example, I'm wearing a green hat, and I typically only wear this hat around St. Patrick's Day, and it really saves me from a pinch. See what I did there? Yeah, okay, that was a bad joke. But depending on what group you're in, they may allow anything from face paint to socks to contact lenses, for all I know. Typically for us, it has to be some article of clothing, so face paint doesn't count. I don't know about wristbands. Would wristbands count? But it's debatable. It gets tossed back and forth every year. But if you are not wearing green, you are giving people permission to pinch you. And nobody likes to get pinched, so people typically wear green on St. Patrick's Day, at least where I'm from. But the reason I bring this up is because I want to look at the idea of unspoken traditions and whether they should be upheld or overthrown or who knows what else. Now, I believe on my blog I have looked at the topic of tradition in general before, and I believe I've also done a post on weighing the pros and cons of anything. Both of those topics are relevant to the discussion, and I think the one on tradition is a bit more obviously important to this particular topic because they're both about tradition. Now, in my post on tradition, I kind of condemned tradition in general. I didn't specifically say that it's bad, but I did basically say that we shouldn't do something just because it's tradition. We shouldn't do something for the sake of it being tradition. Now, the reason the pros and cons are important is because I also brought that up in my post on tradition, which I said essentially that we should weigh something up and down. So just because there is a very little reason to do something doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it anyway, because it might be that there's only a little bit of reason to do it, but there's no reason at all not to do it. And it could also be the other way around. It might be that there's only a little bit of reason not to do it, but there's no reason at all to do it. And there are various different factors that play in and how important they are changes. For example, something feels good, or it's fun, or something like that does weigh in for a reason to do it. But it's a very small reason to do it. Now, if there is no reason not to do it, then it being fun wins out. But if there is a reason not to do it that's actually a serious reason, then basically any reason not to do it would outweigh the reason to do it if your only reason to do it is that it's fun. Now, if there are multiple reasons, which is more common on either side, then it becomes a bit more of a balancing game. And that's what we need to look at, I think, in tradition, because just doing something because that's the way it's always been done before is a really lousy reason if that's your only reason for doing it. Now, it is still a reason to continue doing something, but it is so ridiculously small that it is even outweighed by it's fun and it makes me feel good. So then the question is, how does this get applied to assumed traditions? For example, like St. Patrick's Day, I just kind of assume that if somebody is not wearing green, it's okay to pinch them. And I mean, I don't go up and pinch random strangers, but if I see someone that I know, even if I've known them for less than a year, which means that I haven't seen them on St. Patrick's Day before, if I see someone that I know who is not wearing green, I'm going to go over and pinch them. But even more commonly, assumed traditions are used in a family setting. For example, if you play Monopoly, you may have a set of rules that you use for your family because you found it to be more convenient or to better suit the way that you play the game or something like that. Or you may have assigned seats or assigned pieces or something like that. Like in our car, we have a specific way that we determine who sits where. And in our games, like in Clue, when I play Clue, I'm Colonel Mustard, and it's never really discussed. It's just something that is assumed. It's an assumed tradition. I can't remember a time when I've ever played Clue not as Colonel Mustard. You know, it's the type of thing that people don't talk about. It's just tradition. Now, personally, I like playing as Colonel Mustard, so it's not one of those things that I think about, should I abolish this tradition? Because I don't see a reason to abolish the tradition. But I think that assumed traditions should be upheld until they are challenged. Now, I think that any tradition, whether it's an assumed tradition or whether it's a tradition that you specifically say, we're doing this because it's a tradition, I think that either way, any tradition should be able to be challenged. Someone should be able to say, no, this isn't right, this needs to change, or I don't see a reason for doing this, or something like that. Anything, it needs to be something that can be challenged. But if something is assumed, I don't think that it is right, for example, for someone to decide one day to change it for everybody else. For example, let's say that I have decided that I don't want to be pinched if I'm not wearing green. I think that in order to change that, if I am going to exempt myself from the tradition of St. Patrick's Day pinching people who are not wearing green, I think that in order to do that, I need to inform people before it actually takes effect. So I could notify everyone I know the day before St. Patrick's Day, I don't care if I'm wearing green or not, please don't pinch me. And in that case, it would be best if people do not pinch me on St. Patrick's Day, even if I'm not wearing green. But let's say I am on it is St. Patrick's Day now, and let's say that I have decided now that I don't want to be pinched. If somebody comes up to me and pinches me, how are they supposed to know? Am I supposed to now expect it to take effect? Now, I don't think that that is reasonable. I think that in order to exempt myself from the tradition, if I'm going to tell people that I'm exempting myself from it on St. Patrick's Day while it is taking place, then I think that it should not take effect until the next St. Patrick's Day, because it's an assumed tradition, and I know that it's an assumed tradition, so why in the world would I just assume that everybody else is going to suddenly quit assuming that this tradition is taking place? Now, I do think that tradition should be able to be challenged, and so either you could challenge it to exempt yourself, or you could challenge it to say, no, this isn't good and it needs to stop. Either case, it needs to be something that can be challenged, but I don't think that it's reasonable to decide at one point that a tradition is going away because you don't like it, and so now we are going to change the way things all work. So to put this on a more relatable level, let's look at the assigned seating in our car. Now let's say that as we are getting into the car to go someplace, my little brother decides that he doesn't like the way the seats are assigned, and he decides to challenge it. He doesn't get to challenge it right then. He doesn't get to say, no, wait a minute, I want to sit in the front seat this time, so you have to sit in the back. That's not reasonable, because it's kind of just assumed, and we are now getting in the car to go somewhere. This is not the time or the place to discuss it. Now, let's say that he doesn't think it's fair. He can discuss this at some other time. So that is to say, after this point, he can say, now I don't think that it is fair for the way that the seats are assigned, and I think that we need to discuss this. And then there's a bit more time and space to discuss things, and he can say, well, just because I'm the youngest doesn't mean that I should sit in the back, because it's not my fault that I was born last. And I can say, well, yes, but your legs are far shorter, which is why I sit in the front, because I need more leg room. And it can go back and forth, and there can be an actual discussion. But when something is already taking place, I don't think is the time to a call to action against a certain tradition. So even though I don't think that its tradition is a good reason for doing something, I think that if a tradition is going to be canceled, it should be canceled in the proper way and the proper time. So those are my thoughts on assumed tradition. So remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and fare thee well.